Welcome to Nature's Guardians. I'm Micah Siegel. Each week, I talk with people working to save and help animals around the world. They are nature's guardians, and you can become one too. Today, I'm talking with John Droz. Welcome to the show, John.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Great to have you. So, to start, tell me about your background and how you got where you are now.
Okay, well, I'm the oldest of 9, so can you imagine that? I have 8 brothers and sisters.
That would be annoying.
Among other things, yes. So I went to Catholic schools my whole life, grammar school, high school, and then Boston College. And I had two degrees in Boston College, physics and mathematics. And then I went to Syracuse University and got a graduate degree in physics. From there, I worked at General Electric Aerospace, and I got into management, and I retired at age 34. Since that time, I've had the time to do whatever I want. So I'm now 70-something, and I try to help people. I decided to help people understand science better because there's a lot of technical things that we as a society are dealing with, whether it's climate, whether it's energy choices, whether it's COVID. These are all technical matters, and unfortunately, most people aren't too technically proficient. One of the reasons people aren't so technically with it is because of our education system. So looking at that, the K through 12 part, in my view, has some really serious deficiencies.
So explain to us the problem with education.
When we look at what's going on in K through 12 science education, there's some very disturbing things that are happening there. 2 things that are problematic to me is that, number one, in the United States in general, students are not taught how to critically think. The second thing that's I found very disturbing is about the scientific method. You know what the scientific method is?
No, can you explain?
But basically, the scientific method was something that was first recognized almost 4,000 years ago in ancient Egypt. So a scientific method basically is a several-step process where you come up with a problem and you analyze how to test out whether your possible solution for a problem works. So scientists in general actually, again, I'm speaking as a professional scientist, actually use this type of thinking, this methodology, quite a bit. The other good thing about the scientific method is that it's much broader than science. It's really a problem-solving methodology. So it would be helpful for K through 12 students to learn this because that would help them do things based on or come up with a problem-solving methodology that applies across the board, whether it was deciding what type of girlfriend to go out with, what subjects you want to take in college, a whole slew of things that have nothing to do with science. And there's 45 states that have dropped the scientific method. And this month, I was able to get the first one to change, and that was North Carolina, where I live. So North Carolina hadn't been doing it for 15 years. And on July 6th, they officially announced that they were going to reinstate the scientific method as something being prioritized and taught in the science curriculum in K through 12 schools in North Carolina.
Sounds like something Richard Feynman would approve of.
Do you know who Richard Feynman is?
I've read like 5 pages of one of his books. So.
Okay. Well, he's a pretty smart scientist. So yes, absolutely he would approve of that.
What about the other states?
Well, I'm working on those. So for instance, I sent a letter, an email to a key person in New York State to try to get some discussion going. The average situation is that most parents don't know this is happening. If you talk to parents, you took a survey, that might be something interesting for you to do sometime for your program. Take a survey of a bunch of parents and say, what do you think about the scientific method? And I can tell you that essentially all of them would say, that's a good thing. I remember being taught that when I was in high school. And then the second question would say, do you realize it's not being taught anymore? And they would probably be quite surprised. Now, another question you ought to be asking is science. What is science, anyways? You know what a good definition of science is, or what would you say?
It's a way to solve problems you have in life, and it's a way to think and a philosophy.
Well, a lot of what you're saying there has some truth to it. The technical answer for science is that science is a process rather than, let's say, equations. So once you understand that science is a process is all about educating us about what are some of the truths, the technical truths of our world. So we want to learn about energy, for instance. What are our best choices for energy? Well, that's a science question. Whether we had good policies on COVID or not, that's a science question. Whether climate change is an imminent threat, that's a science question. Things of that nature. So we are actually in the middle of a fight between real science and political science.
And what is the difference between real science and political science?
Okay, well, that's a good question. Political science has nothing to do with science. Let's say there's an issue as to whether we should use wind energy or not. So there's two ways of making that decision. One is a science decision, and the other is a political decision. Political decision is based on whether, I'm talking about a politician now saying I'm in favor of wind energy. They say things like, will this get me votes here in my next election? Is this something that the public thinks is a good idea? And if so, if I support it, then they're going to favor me and vote me in next time. Is this something my constituents are going to be happy about? Is this something that lobbyists are going to be happy about so that they're going to donate to my campaign, for instance? Stuff like that. There was no science involved in that decision. So a real science decision would be based on, is wind energy good or bad? It would be based on practical facts. So we would say, okay, how does it compare to our other sources economically? How does it compare to our other sources reliability-wise? How does it compare to our other sources environmentally? Stuff like that. That's a science-based decision. But none of that happened in the politics part. They may say they do some of that, but they don't. They're doing it whatever they think is going to be in their best interest.
Okay. So back to critical thinking. What is critical thinking and why do we need it?
Well, critical thinking is looking at things, I would say, in two directions differently. One is more breadth, more wider, and the other is more depth. So that's deeper. So critical thinking versus regular run-of-the-mill thinking is, the simple version is, it's looking at things much more thoroughly. To do that, you need to sort of be trained to do that. So if I ask you, tell me what, I want you, tell me what you think about wind energy.
I have done little to no research on wind energy or energy in general. So I'd be skeptical and not just believe what the news says.
Good. That's a science position. Scientists, by definition, are supposed to be skeptical. They start off with that mindset to say, let's be questioning. And that's why I say where critical thinking ought to be taught in science, because those are the people who are naturally questioners. So it's good that you're careful of not just buying into things, but most people aren't like that. You took a poll of, let's say, your friends and asked them what they thought about wind energy. I'm quite sure that the majority would say, well, that's a good thing. And if you ask them further, well, why is it a good thing? And they may say something like, well, we need wind energy to save us from climate change. Isn't that a logical thing they would say?
Yeah, I think so. But my friends are pretty smart.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, that's good. And they ought to be interested in the type of things you're talking about. But smart, there's a difference between smart and critical thinking, though. You have to make sure you're clear about that. You can be a very smart person and not be a critical thinker, quite frankly. And I know some that aren't. The reason is sometimes smart people get carried away with their own smartness and say, hey, I understand all this kind of stuff. I don't have to do any research into this. People need to do critical thinking on things that are important. Okay, the surprise is that what's going on in most school is that, number one, they're not only, they don't teach critical thinking, that's bad enough, but usually they're teaching the opposite of critical thinking. What do you think the opposite of critical thinking is?
not doing any research in a topic, but thinking you know all about it?
Okay, well, you're getting closer. I would say they want people, students, let's say, in this case, to just go along with whatever is politically acceptable. So the question is whether you just go along with that and say, okay, well, this is what the official position is. This is what the school wants. This is what the teacher wants. This is what the textbook says.
That leads to a question I've been wanting to ask. How can I know when to believe what most people think or to challenge what most people think?
My personal opinion, being an old person here, is generally speaking, what most people think is wrong. You want to have a general idea here, because most people are not critical thinkers. Most people have been misled in their education here, so they've been miseducated. So between those two things, it's not likely that the majority of people are going to be accurate on technical matters anyways, we're talking about here. Their focus, science matters, technical matters. Ordinarily, a smart person says, look, I'm going to develop a network of some other credible people that I know that I can ask these questions to. So let's say there's a question about COVID. So you may have somebody that's a physician, let's say, that you have respect for, that you know is not only a competent person, but a critically thinking person. You might ask them their view on it and see what they have to say. I'm not saying that would be your sole determiner, but it may give you a leg up as to the direction to go in.
What's going on with professional scientists and scientific research papers?
Well, this is another one of the challenges of our time here, that scientists are in a tug of war here. And most scientists don't just go and do a detailed, complex research on their own. That would mean funding it out of their own pocket. Somebody has to give them the money to do this. Somebody has to pay for the test equipment and all sorts of other stuff here. I'm speaking in general here now, so there's exceptions, but somebody is paying them. So they know that by and large, let's say if they're being paid by a corporation, a business, well, that business is not going to be happy if they come up with some results here that are contrary to the business's interests. So they're in a quandary right at the bat here. Do I tell the truth come heck or high water here, or do I come up with a story that is going to please the person, the company that funded me? Well, that may sound like a simple thing to solve, but it's a real world problem that isn't so simple. So that's one of the conflicts that a lot of scientists end up going down the way, say, look, I have a job, I have a family I have to feed, so on and so forth. I need to keep the funders, the grantors, happy. So I'm going to say things that are going to make them happy. Well, that's contrary to science. Science is telling it like it is. But unfortunately, if people start doing that, that undermines real science. Another consideration they have is, let's say if they're in a college or something, that they know that there's going to be what's called peer review, other people looking at it. Well, they know that these peer people in general are going to have, because they're picked for that, to have some political perspective on this topic that the person is writing about. It's professionally embarrassing for you to submit a paper and then have peer reviewers, other scientists, say, you made a lot of mistakes in this. That wouldn't be a good thing, right? So they know the type of things that are going to happen here. So the process of peer review, unfortunately, is well documented as being compromised. It's not an objective source, unfortunately. So that's just part of what we're living in here. A lot of it, again, comes back to this issue of political science versus real science. So some people have asked me, for instance, I was meeting with a federal senator, and I said, you need to be careful of some of these papers that you're being given here as being credible on certain topics. And they said, well, how do we tell the difference between good and bad ones? And I said, well, there's four things you can look at that might give you, that should give you a good indication of whether the paper is a quality paper. Number one is it objective? can't have a good paper unless it's objective. So if a person is starting off with a predetermined idea, or they eliminate certain things to steer it in a certain way, that's contrary to objectivity. So you have to look for how objective is this person being. Second thing is what's called comprehensive. That means thorough. How thorough are they? Are they just looking at a little tiny aspect of it here that's going to maybe give a biased result? Or are they looking at a bigger picture, more thorough perspective? Third thing is what's called empirical. Empirical means, well, do you know what empirical means?
No.
Okay, empirical means real world. So is this person using real world things? So for instance, let's say wind energy, we're going to keep using that as an example. That if you went to a wind developer and said, how much CO2 is wind energy saving us? And they give us a paper by 4 PhDs, but you look at the paper and the paper is all based on a computer analysis. They will, a computer analysis isn't real world. That's somebody that's made up some things here, some assumptions, put it in a computer. I have no idea what their assumptions are or whatever else. Why are you using real world data? Because you have real world data. There's 300,000, let's say, wind turbines spinning in the world today. Why aren't you giving me the data for some of those 300,000 turbines? Why instead are you giving me a computer result? So that's a violation of real world criteria, empirical. That's the third thing. The fourth thing is transparent. A transparent paper study or something would be something where you can see all of the data. The person doesn't just say, well, here's my conclusions, take my word for it. They show you all of the data. So that's a good thing. So you should be able to look at the data and make your own conclusions about whether the data is accurate or thorough or whatever. So those four things: comprehensive, thorough, objective, empirical, transparent.
Let's take an example of something I want to figure out. Every year, 100 million sharks, 200,000 penguins, 20,000 elephants, 450 rhinos, 150 tigers, and dozens of lions are killed by poachers. They die because people in Asia believe these animals' parts have magic healing properties and show high status. The poachers hardly make any money, while the middlemen make millions. Most of the focus is on preventing the poachers from killing the animals in the wild, because people I've spoken with say that trying to convince Asians to stop buying these things is too difficult. They say it will take generations to change habits. So, John, if your goal were to reduce the number of animals poached every year, what would you do?
I would say, from what you're saying here, that I don't know whether the facts are true. That'd be one thing. As a scientist, I would check, is this true? So I don't know whether there's other drivers that are in addition to what you're saying. I've heard of what you're saying, and I don't doubt that's part of it. But whether it's 10% of it or 90% of it, I have no idea, because it's outside of my realm of expertise. Let's say it is that 90% of it's true because of religious beliefs. Yes, I would say that educating the public about these religious beliefs would be a challenge and take some time, but lots of times we are too much of a rush to try to get things done, and sometimes the long strategy is ultimately the best strategy. The Chinese government made a big issue about this. By and large, people would comply because that's what they're trained to do, go along with what the government says.
What's your prediction for science and society for the next 30 years?
Well, the direction that things are going on isn't good. Good scientists have been censored, penalized, ignored. Bad scientists are getting control of things and dictating policies like COVID policies, which were pretty much ridiculously unscientific. So we need to have people more clearly understand the fight that's going on between real science and political science. And we need to have people who are critical thinkers here. But the bad actors here are trying to see that every kid that gets educated in K through 12 then on to college is miseducated. So those people all become voting citizens in short order, and that's not good for our country. Something like, just to give you an idea, something like 4 million kids graduate from high school every year in America. So that's 4 million that by and large are uneducated regarding some important things, and by and large are not critical thinkers.
So how can kids learn critical thinking outside of school?
Well, the first thing I would say you do is you start off by questioning everything. It'd be better to question everything than to question nothing. So that's sort of a perspective of scientists. When they say a scientist is skeptical, you know what skeptical means?
Yeah, I actually used it earlier.
Okay, good. So skeptical means questioning things. So it's a good habit to be in when somebody tells you things, to say why or how or so forth. Ask those type of questions. Get in the habit of doing that. And then second of all, when people give you some answer, to give it some thought about these 4 criteria I said from a real analysis. So are they telling you comprehensive information? Are they telling you objective? Are they telling you things that are based on real world stuff? And lastly, are they telling you something transparent so you can go check it out for yourself? So asking questions like that can be very helpful, but essentially what you're trying to do is to think about things more broadly, wider, I said, and more deeply.
So if I could summarize your view, what's popular is rarely what's true.
Well, when it comes to science things, that's what we're talking about here. Science things, yes, I would say generally that is true.
Thank you, John.
Mike, it's been my pleasure here. One other suggestion I'd make is that, are you familiar with Substack? You know what that is?
Well, no.
Okay, well, that's the popular place where journalists started a few years ago to give journalists a broader way of expressing some of their ideas. And so I now have a Substack column, and it's about critical thinking. So it's free. Anybody can go on there and read. So I'd say you or some of your friends ought to go through. I've now written like 60 articles on critical thinking about different subjects.
We'll put it in the link below so viewers can access it easily.
That's good. Excellent. Yes, thank you.
Okay, and thank you for watching. You can help animals by hitting the like button and subscribing to this channel. I'll see you next time on Nature's Guardians. Bye.